So Damascus fell. Let's get into it. So I'm listening to Ben Shapiro, and he's actually not been that bad on this video so far. Definitely like being really pro-Israel and anti-Muslim, but for a Ben Shapiro video, it's not that bad. And if you take a look at the comments, as a Syrian Christian living abroad, I fear for what left of our family in Damascus, God help us. I have a good friend from Syria, still with family in Syria, who's beside himself. He knows that the rebels are actually Al-Qaeda and calls them monsters. The entire world should understand this. So this is going to be a research stream because I mean, my channel name is Uninformed. I'm going to be doing some research along with everyone else. But if we look up persecutions of Christians by the Islamic State, there have been a lot of Christians getting kind of wrecked in the Middle East. The Christians in Iraq have fallen from 1.2 million in 2011 to 120,000 in 2024. And the number in Syria from 1.5 million to 300,000 falls, driven by persecution by Islamic terrorists. And I mean, this isn't the most academic of resources, but according to Wikipedia, Christians have been subjected to massacres, forced conversions, rape, sexual slavery, and the systemic destruction of their historical sites, churches, and other places of worship. Which is ironic, because that's exactly what Israel is doing to Palestinians right now. So it is like a reflection of what's happening in Israel, and when it's done to Christians, that's unacceptable. But when it's done to Palestinians, that's 100% acceptable. Oh, you bulldozed a graveyard to like put up a mall, that's fine. You destroyed a mosque and now it's a nightclub, who cares? Like, it's Jewish people, and Jewish people, that's their homeland, so the United States is going to do everything to support that. So it's just like racism, and it's also an aspect of American imperialism, because even for American citizens, if they kind of stand in the way of American imperialism, America's like, okay, we don't really care, so you're on your own. So we're just going to do some more research into this. So the Assad regime has been taken down. Syria, historic opportunity to end and redress decades of grave human rights violations under President Assad must be seized. Responding to the ousting of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad following the seizure of power by opposition forces in the capital city of Damascus, Agnes Kalamard, Secretary General of Amnesty International, said, after over 5 decades of brutality and repression, the people of Syria may finally have an opportunity to live free of fear with their rights respected. Under the rule of Bashar al-Assad and before him his father Hafez al-Assad, Syrians have been subjected to a horrifying catalog of human rights violations that cause untold human suffering on a vast scale. This included attacks with chemical weapons, barrel bombs, and other war crimes, as well as murder, torture, and forced disappearance and extermination that amount to crimes against humanity. This historic opportunity must be now seized and decades of grave human rights violations redressed. So I agree with Agnes Kalamard of Amnesty International. I think my first thought coming into this, with the understanding that Assad has been deposed, is this is now an opportunity. It's an opportunity to set things right. And so when people say that there are no good guys in this situation, it's like, right now, that might be true. But if it's a Syrian Islamic extremist militia group against a brutal totalitarian regime that has committed crimes against humanity, and the brutal totalitarian regime has just been ousted, and now there's like a new form of government. There's the potential for a new form of government, and I think that there is a potential for things to turn around here. But what I will say is that oppression causes extremism, and Israel is continuing to bomb Syria to try to start fighting now the Islamic extremist groups. And that is not the path forward to a more peaceful Syria. And we can hear Ben Shapiro talking about that, where he will say that that's such a good thing that Israel's bombing Syria.
With Assad being gone, significant downsides with Assad being gone. There are not a lot of wonderful players in the Middle East. Get to that in a moment. First, no one wants to think about that, the cold hard
Oh
truth
yeah, I
of
gotta
it.
let him
And
do
then
his
you have
ad.
the question of what Bashar al-Assad was doing to the country, which is killing hundreds of thousands of people using everything up to and including chemical weapons. Well, he's gone now, and Israel has been striking a lot of the chemical weapons depots to prevent them from falling into the hands of the new rebel alliance over here. Okay, so, again, is any of this wonderful? It isn't. But the one thing that is an upside is that the Iranian crescent is dead. Okay, the Shia crescent that, again, stretched all the way from Iran all the way across to Lebanon, that is now dead. What does that mean? It means that the Iranian regime is actually in quite real trouble here. All of their biggest proxies are gone. Hamas, gone.
So Ben Shapiro is coming at this from the standpoint that basically all Muslims are bad and Israel needs to be the one superpower without any kind of pushback from any country in the area. And obviously Ben Shapiro's main goal is that Iran gets pretty much like destroyed, or at least its teeth busted out, and now it's a lame duck country. That's what Ben Shapiro's main goal is. And so when Syria falls, that's good for Ben Shapiro. And these Islamic extremist groups, Ben Shapiro wants them dead as well because they're Islamic. And then obviously Hezbollah did pretty bad stuff in Syria on behalf of the Syrian government, again because Iran both supports the Syrian government and they fund Hezbollah. However, Hezbollah also served a pretty good function of defending Lebanon from Israel. And then, I mean, obviously he wants Hamas exterminated. He would say that himself. But, so, the reason I'm bringing this up is because you have the reaction of kind of the Zionist, pro-American imperialism side. And I think it's interesting to take a look at a few different reactions. So if we look at Donald Trump, and I don't think Donald Trump wrote this tweet, but I think he got a staffer to write this tweet for him. So he posted this a few hours ago. And he says, opposition fighters in Syria in an unprecedented move have totally taken over numerous cities in a highly coordinated offensive and are now on the outskirts of Damascus, obviously preparing to make a very big move towards taking out Assad. And now they actually have. Russia, because they're so tied up in Ukraine and with the loss of over 600,000 soldiers, seems incapable of stopping this literal march through Syria, a country they have protected for years. This is where former President Obama refused to honor his commitment of protecting the red line in the sand, and all hell broke out, with Russia stepping in. But now they are, like possibly Assad himself, being forced out, and it may actually be the best thing that can happen to them. There was never much of a benefit in Syria for Russia other than to make Obama look really stupid. Goddamn, Trump's still obsessed with Obama. In any event, Syria is a mess, but is not our friend, and the United States should have nothing to do with it. This is not our fight. Let it play out. Do not get involved. And then we can look at what Joe Biden said. Let's see. What did Joe Biden say? Oh, yeah, here. New opportunities are now opening up for the people of Syria and for the entire region. Looking ahead, the United States will do the following. First, we will engage with Syrian groups, including within the process led by the United Nations, to establish the transition away from the Assad regime toward an independent, sovereign Syria. Second, we will help ensure stability in eastern Syria, protecting our personnel against any threats. We will maintain our mission against ISIS. Third, we'll support Syria's neighbors, including Jordan, Lebanon, Iraq, and Israel, should any threat arise from Syria during this period of transition. Finally, we will remain vigilant. So you kind of have two sides of the same coin. Donald Trump is saying don't get involved with Syria, just let whatever happens. And Joe Biden is saying we're going to support Syria, but also we're going to kind of control it. And both of these guys are kind of two sides of the same coin, which is American imperialism. Donald Trump is saying that just don't support Syria, let whatever happens. But I'm going to fund Israel and give Israel everything they want. And Israel's going to basically bomb the hell out of Syria. And that's going to be Donald Trump's imperialism by proxy. So when he says America first, we're not going to do anything with Syria, he's basically talking about just humanitarian aid and the good that the United States could do through working with Syrian groups and opening up diplomatic relations with Syrian groups. and also working through the UN to make sure there is stability. And I know the UN doesn't have a perfect track record, but because there have been foreign interference in Syria for so long, like decades now, and the country is so messed up because of imperialism and these proxy wars between the US and Russia, and Israel being propped up, and Israel basically creating Hezbollah, which propped up Iran and radicalized all of these groups against Israel and the West. Like, to come into a space, fuck it all up, and then be like, okay, well, it's not our problem anymore. You guys deal with it. I think that is abdicating any kind of responsibility that the U.S. and the rest of the world and the UN do have for Syria. So let's just take a look at this. Caspian report, why Syria's civil war restarted. Wait, when was this posted? Number 18 on trending? I honestly don't even really want to watch this. Let's check it out.
After an 8-year break, Turkish-backed Syrian rebels took over Aleppo on November 30th and are now moving toward the center of Syria. The speedy advance has put the rebel forces about halfway between Aleppo and the capital, Damascus. Not even at the peak of the civil war had the rebel forces accomplished anything remotely as today. Meanwhile, Russian aircraft are bombing towns and cities, trying to dislodge the rebel positions. At sea, in the eastern Mediterranean, Russia is flexing muscles with Navy drills featuring submarine cruise missiles, anti-ship missiles, and hypersonic missiles. At the same time, Assad is lobbying Putin for even greater support. To the east, the Iranians are gearing up for a prolonged war. Thousands of Iraqi fighters have been dispatched towards Syria to help keep Assad in power. However, these formations have been targeted and bombed by the United States, which is looking to weaken Iran's grip and secure Israel's perimeters. With so many moving parts, it can be difficult to understand what's truly going on or even what's at stake. In these types of drawn-out conflicts, the difference between real and fake is determined only by the authority telling you which is which. Now, the way I deal with these types of events is by going over as many angles as possible. I read Russian, Iranian, Turkish, Syrian, and Israeli headlines. For example, Iraqi militias are crossing the border to reinforce Assad's forces. But, as always, be careful with what you read. The majority of articles reporting this lean towards the right. So,
is this a ground news advert?
You want to compensate for things by seeking the opposite side as well. And as a
ground news / Caspian. Oh man, I can clock these things coming from a mile away. The only ones that get me are the Daily Wire ads because they're so out of pocket. Like at one point they're talking about a beauty queen, and then the next point they're talking about how you can eat beef and that's gonna help your skin look good. So this is...
Aleppo has been at the heart of the Syrian civil war since the start. When Assad regained control over the city in December 2016, the conflict essentially ended. Parts of the country still
Okay, so this is like the most recent segment of the conflict, the most recent leg. Let's take a look at this Al Jazeera article. Syria's war explained from the beginning. Damn, 47 minutes long? The boy who started the Syrian war? Let's check this shit out.
Another day. Another hit-and-run mission for the Free Syrian Army in the southern city of Daraa. It's classic urban guerrilla warfare, and no one knows the streets better than those who played here as children. These men all grew up in Daraa, but this is no game. And if the government troops pinpoint them, they're dead.
هذا ضرب على الخزان والقصر المهدوم من جهة القطوع نعيم.
It is here, in this city, that the uprising against Bashar al-Assad began. Among these fighters is a young man who bears a unique and unintended responsibility. His name is Muawiyah Siasne.
كنت عايش ومدرع البلد مع أهلي أنا وأبوي وأخوتي كنت أدرس ومع أصحابي يعني نطلع ونفوت ودراسة وصلت على السابع ما فيش بعد السابع صارت.
Muawiyah was just 14 when he sprayed anti-government slogans on this school wall in Daraa. It was February 2011, and he could never have imagined the consequences. Well over 500,000 people have been killed in Syria since the start of the war. Muawiyah's home city has been ravaged by street fighting, shelling, barrel bombing. The war has created scars that may never heal.
Anyway, so, like, the Assad government, obviously horrible, taken away all kinds of human rights, done atrocities to its people, especially the people that have been resisting against them in the war. And, like, we can watch this film. Well, let's just read this article by Al Jazeera. So, what caused the uprising? While lack of freedoms and economic woes drove resentment of the Syrian government, the harsh crackdown on protesters inflamed public anger. Arab Spring. In 2011, successful uprisings that became known as the Arab Spring toppled Tunisia's and Egypt's presidents. This gave hope to Syrian pro-democracy activists. That March, peaceful protests erupted in Syria as well, after 15 boys were detained and tortured for writing graffiti in support of the Arab Spring. One of the boys, a 13-year-old, was killed after having been brutally tortured. Jesus Christ. The Syrian government, led by President Bashar al-Assad, responded to the protests by killing hundreds of demonstrators and imprisoning many more. In July 2011, defectors from the military announced the formation of the Free Syrian Army, a rebel group aiming to overthrow the government, and Syria began to slide into war. While the protests in 2011 were mostly non-sectarian, the armed conflict surfaced starker sectarian divisions. Most Syrians are Sunni Muslims, but Syria's security establishment has long been dominated by members of the Alawi sect, of which Assad is a member. In 1982, Bashar's father ordered a military crackdown on the Muslim Brotherhood in Hama, killing tens of thousands of people and flattening much of the city. Even global warming is said to have played a role in sparking the 2011 uprising. Severe drought plagued Syria from 2007 to 2010, causing as many as 1.5 million people to migrate from the countryside into cities, exacerbating poverty and social unrest. International involvement. Foreign backing and open intervention have played a large role in Syria's war. Russia entered the conflict in 2015 and has been the Assad government's main ally since then. Regional actors. The governments of majority Shia Iran and Iraq and Lebanon-based Hezbollah have supported Assad, while Sunni-majority countries including Turkey, Qatar, and Saudi Arabia supported anti-Assad rebels. Since 2016, Turkish troops have launched several operations against the Islamic State of Iraq and the Levant, ISIL, also known as ISIS, near its borders, as well as against Kurdish groups armed by the United States. Anti-ISIL coalition. The U.S. has armed anti-Assad rebel groups and led an international coalition bombing ISIL targets since 2014. Israel carried out air raids inside Syria, reportedly targeting Hezbollah and pro-government fighters and facilities. The first time Syrian air defenses shot down an Israeli warplane was in February 2018. Damn, they shot down an Israeli warplane? I guess that was before Israel, but before they really could use drones. So they're targeting Hezbollah and pro-government fighters and facilities. U.S. and Russia. The U.S. has repeatedly stated its opposition to the Assad government backed by Russia, but has not involved itself as deeply. Chemical red lines. So this is what Donald Trump was talking about with Obama. Former U.S. President Barack Obama had warned that the use of chemical weapons in Syria was a red line that would prompt military intervention. In April 2017, the U.S. carried its first direct military action against Assad's forces, launching 59 Tomahawk cruise missiles at a Syrian Air Force base, from which U.S. officials believe a chemical attack on Khan Shaykhun had been launched. 1 year later, on April 14th, despite Russian warnings, the U.S. launched an attack together with France and the UK at chemical weapons sites. CIA training. In 2013, the CIA began a covert program to arm, fund, and train rebel groups opposing Assad, but the program was later shut down after it was revealed the CIA had spent $500 million, but only trained 60 fighters. That's so funny. Russia's campaign. In September 2015, Russia launched a bombing campaign against what it referred to as terrorist groups in Syria, which included ISIL as well as anti-Assad rebel groups backed by the USA. Russia also has deployed military advisors to shore up Assad's defenses. At the UN Security Council, Russia and China have repeatedly vetoed Western-backed resolutions on Syria. Russia and China have vetoed Western-backed resolutions on Syria. Peace talks. Peace negotiations have been ongoing between the Syrian government and the opposition in order to achieve a military ceasefire and political transition in Syria, but the main sticking point has been the fate of Assad. Geneva. The first round of UN-facilitated talks between the Syrian government and opposition delegates took place in Geneva, Switzerland in June 2012. The latest round of talks in December 2017 failed amid a tit-for-tat between the Syrian government and opposition delegates over statements about the future role of Assad in a transitional government. In 2014, Staffan de Mistura replaced Kofi Annan as the UN Special Envoy for Syria. Astana. In May 2017, Russia, Iran, and Turkey called for the setup of the 4 de-escalation zones in Syria, over which Syrian and Russian fighter jets were not expected to fly. After denouncing plans to partition Syria in March 2018, a follow-up trilateral summit was held in Turkey to discuss the way forward. In January 2018, Russia sponsored talks over the future of Syria in the Black Sea city of Sochi, but the opposition bloc boycotted the conference, claiming it was an attempt to undercut the UN effort to broker a deal. Rebel groups. Since the conflict began as a Syrian rebellion against the Assad government, many new rebel groups have joined the fighting in Syria and have frequently fought one another. The Free Syrian Army is a loose conglomeration of armed brigades formed in 2011 by defectors from the Syrian army and civilians backed by the US, Turkey, and several Gulf countries. In December 2016, the Syrian army scored its biggest victory against the rebels when it recaptured the strategic city of Aleppo. Since then, the FSA has controlled limited areas in northwestern Syria. In 2018, Syrian opposition fighters evacuated from the last rebel stronghold near Damascus. However, backed by Turkey, the FSA took control of Afrin near the Turkey-Syria border from Kurdish rebels seeking self-rule. Wow, that's great. They're targeting the Kurdish rebel fighters that are like, we just want to rule ourselves, and they're like, instead of attacking Assad, we're going to take you over. ISIL emerged in northern and eastern Syria in 2013 after overrunning large portions of Iraq. The group quickly gained international notoriety for its brutal executions and its energetic use of social media to recruit fighters from around the world. Other groups fighting in Syria include Jabhat Fatah al-Sham, Iran-backed Hezbollah, and the Syrian Democratic Forces, dominated by the Kurdish People's Protection Units. The situation today. Fighting in Syria continues on several fronts. Well, this is kind of no longer relevant. Syrian refugees. Many Syrians having left their homes to seek safety elsewhere in Syria or beyond. As of February 2018, the UN Refugee Agency has registered over 5.5 million refugees from Syria and estimated that there are over 6.5 million internally displaced persons. Lebanon, Turkey, and Jordan are hosting most of the Syrian refugees, many of whom attempt to journey onwards to Europe in search of better conditions. The 1951 Geneva Convention relating to the status of refugees describe a refugee as any person who, owing to well-founded fear of being persecuted for reasons of race, religion, nationality, membership of a particular social group, or political opinion, is outside the country of his nationality and is unable or, owing to such fears, unwilling to avail himself in the protection of that country. So, okay. I mean, this situation is really fucked up. What is this? CNN? Allahu Akbar!
celebrations are breaking out everywhere. This woman actually has just offered me some sweets. مبروك انت لبنانية مش من سوريا؟ بس يسلموا يديك يسلموا يديك. This is the mood right now. It is festive. It is jubilant. Take a look with me. You can see people are waving the flag of the Syrian revolution. It has got 3 stars. You can see children. And it's just an extraordinary moment. I think no one realized that this would ever actually happen after so many years of waiting, so many years. A lot of fireworks as well. Let's keep moving. You can see the traffic is now barely moving. There's just so much energy.
So, I mean, at the end of the day, Assad fleeing to Moscow and the Syrian rebels take over Damascus, it is a brutal dictator getting overthrown. And that's not something that you should feel bad about celebrating. And even though there's a chance that radical extremist groups can seize control and do bad stuff on their own, and it's like, oh, well, one bad guy beating another bad guy, does that really do anything? Well, Assad had the institutional backing of not only Iran, but also Russia and the diplomatic shielding of China. And he was doing horrible atrocities on a mass scale. And that guy got deposed. He's no longer in power. That is something that can be celebrated. And these extremist groups that seize control, they are just not approaching anywhere near the horrible things that Assad did. So obviously that's something that should be celebrated. What do we got here? Some pictures from CNN. Jubilation on the streets of Damascus after fall of Assad. The Syrians poured onto the streets of Damascus to celebrate the toppling of former President Bashar al-Assad, who fled to Russia Sunday after a swift rebel advance, ending more than 5 decades of crushing dynastic rule. Opposition fighters paraded on tanks and fired celebratory gunshots, while residents cheered and held up peace signs to mark the stunning and unexpected political turn for the country, which has suffered a brutal civil war since 2011. Syrian opposition fighters celebrate after the government collapsed in Damascus on December 8th. A woman shouts as people celebrate in Homs on December 8th. Syrians celebrate the arrival of opposition fighters in Damascus on December 8th. People celebrate in Damascus. These are pretty amazing pictures. Opposition fighters celebrate the takeover of the city by insurgents. Across the world, Syrians are celebrating the Assad regime's fall. From Sydney to Stockholm, Syrian communities across the globe are celebrating the fall of Bashar al-Assad's regime following more than 50 years of his family's brutal dictatorship. In Germany, home to the largest number of Syrian refugees outside of the Middle East, hundreds took to the streets of the capital of Berlin on Sunday, many holding posters of Assad's face crossed out in red. We lost hope several years ago, but now hope is returning. Mohammed Hamzalim told the AFP news agency, "We're ready for whatever lies ahead. We are simply happy it couldn't be better." In the Swedish capital, hundreds of Syrians gathered at a major public square, waving flags in green, red, black, and white, colors of the Syrian opposition, while Syrians also celebrated in Dublin and London. Mohammed Haji Mahmoud, a 19-year-old student in the British capital, said the news that Assad had been toppled was unbelievable. Syria is free, liberated again, so it's our time to rebuild it and then, get a new country, he told AFP News. Similar scenes took place in the Turkish city of Gaziantep near the Syrian border. The people are very happy, Syrian Majid Zan told AFP in Gaziantep. And not only here, those who live abroad are in Syria as well. We are saved from the cruel Assad. We are very happy. May God make all dictators fall like Assad. Ferrari F50? This is the next... Oh, they're talking about the cars that Assad had. Crowds gather in Syria's second city, Aleppo, following regime's collapse. Yeah, so people are extremely happy, and there are going to be political implications of this, and there can be negatives, but I don't think that any of those negatives outweigh the positive of deposing a violent dictator. let's see. What does this BBC article say? End of Assad rule will reshape region's balance of power. The fall of Bashar al-Assad was almost unthinkable just a week ago when rebels started their astonishing campaign against the regime from their base in Idlib in Syria's northwest. This is a turning point for Syria. Assad came to power in 2000 after the death of his father Hafez, who ruled the country for 29 years. Assad Jr. inherited a tightly controlled and repressive political structure where opposition was not tolerated. At first, there were hopes that he could be different, more open, less brutal, but those were short-lived. Assad will forever be remembered as the man who violently repressed peaceful protests against his regime in 2011, which led to a civil war. More than 500,000 people were killed, 6 million others became refugees. With the help of Russia and Iran, he crushed the rebels and survived. Russia used its formidable air power while Iran sent military advisors to Syria and Hezbollah. The militia it supports in neighboring Lebanon deployed its well-trained fighters. This did not happen this time. His allies, preoccupied with their own affairs, essentially abandoned him. So first they seized Aleppo. Okay, so what's going to happen next? Okay. Wait. But what happens next? HTS have their roots in Al-Qaeda and a violent past. They've spent the last years trying to rebrand themselves as a nationalist force, and their recent messages have a diplomatic and conciliatory tone. But many are not convinced and are concerned about they might be planning to do and are concerned about concerned about what they might be planning. Just fucking hell, proofread your articles. But many are not convinced and are concerned about what they might be planning to do after toppling the regime. At the same time, the dramatic changes could lead to a dangerous power vacuum and eventually result in chaos and even more violence. So I think that's like kind of fucking comical, like hundreds of thousands of people dead in a civil war, a brutal regime that had like thousands of people in prison, obviously extrajudicially, like political prisoners essentially, and like 6 million refugees, and people are acting like this could be a bad thing. I like there obviously could be people that get into power that aren't the best people in the world, but bombing Syria is not going to make them any better, and withdrawing any kind of aid and support is not going to make them any better. And just like funding Israel and trying to make sure that Israel has dominion over everything in that region is not going to make these people any less extreme. And that's what I'm hearing a lot from conservatives, like Donald Trump saying he wants to pull out and fund Israel. Ben Shapiro saying that basically no Arab is a good Arab and we just need to support Israel no matter what. Israel made Assad fall because they weakened Hezbollah, and now they're also bombing these rebels because the rebels are even bad. Like, they're bad Muslims, they're bad Arabs, and like ultimately Ben Shapiro is going to want to take over Iran, which is going to cause even more radicalization, more extreme groups popping up, and just more violence and death. Okay, let's continue this video.
Remained out of the government's reach, but Assad survived and consolidated power in the Syrian heartland, which stretches from Aleppo to Latakia by the coast to Hama and Homs in the center, and then all the way south to Damascus. This stretch is the most densely populated segment of Syria, hence the heartland. Only Idlib remained out of reach, and that's the place the rebels made their home. More on this later. However, Assad owed his victory to Russian air support and Iranian ground forces. So, when the guns fell silent, Assad became entirely dependent on his allies. Shortly after, Russia and Iran turned against one another, each trying to undermine the other and dominate the future of Syria. Then, Ukraine happened, a turning point. When Russia invaded its neighbor in 2022, it was unable to commit to Syria as it had before. Iran stepped up and became the lead patron. Here, Assad saw an opportunity to take back complete control and oust the Iranians. For the next 2 years, he engaged the UAE and Saudi Arabia and patched things up. For instance, in August 2023, Assad received a warm reception as Syria was welcomed back into the Arab League. This was a milestone, but it still wasn't enough to escape from Iran's orbit. Then came another turning point, the Hamas attack on October 7th. Hurt and enraged, Israel went on the offensive with the aim to decimate Iranian assets, proxies, and interests, with Lebanon being at the center. Assad knew that it was only a matter of time before fighting would spill over into Syria. In response, he reached out to Turkey to normalize relations. Turkish forces and their proxies were occupying tracts of Syrian territory in the north, and Ankara was a principal backer of the Syrian HTS rebels in Idlib. So when talks with Turkey started, there was some initial optimism. Assad agreed that the SDF, tucked in the northeast, was a threat, but the talks failed nonetheless. Assad didn't want to take back millions of Syrian refugees, which Turkey had been hosting for over a decade. This was a sticking point for Turkey. In recent years, social tensions between ethnic Turks and Syrians have flared up. Much of the political discourse in Turkey now revolves around Syrian refugees, so Ankara was eager to find a settlement. However, Assad did the opposite. He rejected the return of his countrymen and placed the withdrawal of Turkish forces from his country as a precondition for normalization. Then he made it worse. Assad's forces started bombing Idlib with artillery, creating additional waves of refugees going towards Turkey. Assad had hoped this could create pressure on Turkey, and it did. The Turkish president reached out to Putin, asking him to intervene. But Putin was preoccupied with Ukraine and had steadily lost influence over Assad. There was nothing Russia could do. Meanwhile, Israel had been bombing Iran and Hezbollah for months, forcing them to relocate resources elsewhere. A local power vacuum was steadily taking shape. The speed at which the rebel forces took Aleppo reflects just how weak Iran had become. So, when Turkey reached the end of its diplomatic ropes, it changed tactics and unleashed its proxies. This then brings us to the present situation. Sitting at the regional crossroads means that any event in Syria will have ripple effects for the entire neighborhood. For Turkey, that means more refugees. For Israel, that means jihadists at the door. For Russia, it's about alliance-building credibility. So let's take a case-by-case look at each power's impact on Syria, starting with Iran. For over a decade, Iran has been the centerpiece of the Syrian conflict. Its actions have directly resulted in the devastation of the country, the deaths of hundreds of thousands of civilians, and the displacement of over 10 million people. Iran did this to keep Assad in power, but more importantly, Iran wanted to create a land bridge to connect directly with its proxies in Lebanon, that is, Hezbollah. This route runs through Iraq and Syria and allows for the shipment of supplies, weapons, and personnel. Without this land bridge, Iran could never feed its proxies and construct the power projection it currently has. This land bridge also counterbalances Sunni powers such as the UAE, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and Turkey, while strengthening Iran's influence over Shia communities in the area. At the same time, Iran uses Syria as a front line in its conflict with Israel. It stations troops and weapons in Syria and uses those.
It's so funny, man. And like, this is why this is why I don't like what Donald Trump and what Ben Shapiro have to say, where it's like, okay, well, we really messed this place up. We really messed up Syria, but now we're just going to leave it alone. It's like, nah, man, like, we have to be involved in rebuilding it. And I'm not saying I'm not saying the U.S. should have boots on the ground, but be willing to, like, economically help out, invest in Syria, just like through the UN if need be. But Syria has been a stomping ground for so many different regional and global superpowers. And now if everyone wants to just leave it alone because, oh, well, I mean, Assad's done. I guess we've all had our fun with this chew toy, and now we're just going to leave it out in the yard and under the blazing sun and have everyone figure it out for themselves. It's like, this should be, I think this is like an opportunity to, and I know it's not going to happen, but this could be like a really big opportunity to come together as a world and show that we can come together and rebuild something that so many different groups and factions have been they've been complicit in ripping it apart. Like, obviously it's not going to happen, but it would be like a pretty poetic end. It would just be like a pretty story if the global superpowers did come together and were responsible for rebuilding this country that they are responsible for tearing down in the first place. Like, this would be a great opportunity for that, because there are so many different hands in the pie that is Syria. But yeah, I don't see it happening, and it's just going to be the US trying to maintain control over Syria. Maybe China's going to try to get in there too. Like, Russia probably is going to stay out. Iran's going to stay out. So it is probably just going to be another like US backed thing. And it's interesting, Trump getting in office, where Trump does have kind of the American first tendencies, and he's like, we're spending how much money on South Korea all the time, and he does have like the inclination to withdraw from supporting these foreign interests that the U.S. has. But I wonder how ingrained this support for Syria is going to be, just in the oncoming month of Joe Biden supporting it and having a U.S. presence on the ground to protect Israel. We have to protect Israel by being inside of Syria. Like, that's his reasoning for having a military presence in Syria still. But it's like, is Trump going to get in office and be like, we got to pull out of Syria? And the generals are going to tell him, no, we're not going to do that. Or the Pentagon or whoever is in charge of dealing with the president, are they just going to tell him no? It'll be really interesting to see.
Assets to deter Israel. In other words, Iran could not be the regional power it strives to be without the land bridge that goes through Syria. However, Iran's stance is at its weakest point in over a decade. Israeli bombing has left Hezbollah vulnerable and loosened Iran's grip. For Israel, meanwhile, the takeover of Aleppo is an unintended consequence. Israel does not necessarily want Assad removed from power, because doing so would create a strategic vacuum that Sunni jihadists would fill. Sure, from the Israeli point of view, Iran is a threat, but Sunni insurgents would be a challenge all the same. Israel's only potential ally.
Yeah, this is the most moral army in the world, having a brutal dictator and being like, I kind of liked him in charge because he was at least keeping things quiet. Sure, he was allowing Iran to use his country to funnel supplies into Hezbollah, but we also kind of liked Hezbollah there because they were just firing rockets. It wasn't that much. It wasn't too bad, but yeah, Israel being like, you got rid of a brutal dictator, not the best. We better start bombing you now. It's like, okay, if you learn nothing, if like you bomb people, you make enemies.
Is the SDF. The SDF controls the northeast of Syria and enjoys military support from the United States. With American support, Israel could create a diagonal corridor that cuts through Syria's eastern border and links up with SDF territory. With Trump in office, that option is all the more possible. Doing so would cut Iran's land bridge through Syria and make it untenable. On the flip side, this area is sparsely populated and logistical hubs are few and far between. As a corridor, it would be difficult to maintain, especially if the United States decides otherwise. What's more, an Israeli corridor linking to the SDF would completely destroy relations with Turkey since the SDF is a threat to them. There would be no more going back. So, as strategic as an Israeli corridor would be, it may not be worth destroying ties with Turkey, with whom relations will likely be restored in a decade. For reference, the SDF is an offshoot of the PKK, which is recognized globally as a terrorist organization, including by the United States and the European Union. The PKK is a Kurdish separatist group that has carried out attacks on civilian targets in Turkey, Iran, Iraq, and elsewhere. Western media frequently label the SDF and its military branch, the YPG, as a Kurdish group, but that is demeaning towards Kurds. Nearly half of Syria's Kurdish population, not to mention minorities such as Assyrians and Yazidis, live in exile because of SDF and YPG practices such as forced conscription, child kidnappings, extremist curriculum, and so on. The point is that the SDF is not the poster child as it is pumped up to be in the media. Here is former US Special Operations Commander Raymond Thomas explaining it candidly.
As you know, sometimes it's of necessity, who's available. The one that I think is most discussed and most misunderstood is the evolution with our counterpart in Syria, the so-called Syrian Democratic Forces. Now, interestingly, they came about that name because at one point in time, and I dealt with them directly, I was in on the formative stage of the relationship with these guys. They formally called themselves the YPG, who the Turks would say equated to the PKK. You're dealing with a terrorist enemy of mine. How can you do that, ally? So we literally played back to them, hey, you got to change your brand. What do you want to call yourself besides the YPG? And with about a day's notice, they declared that they were the Syrian Democratic Forces. I thought it was a stroke of brilliance to put democracy in there somewhere.
Oh my God, dude. This is perfect. This is perfect. Oh yeah, we got rid of Assad, a brutal dictator. Let's use this opportunity to essentially just like colonize Syria even more by exerting our influence on Syria even more. Israel, they'll build a corridor to get to the northeast corner of Syria. The United States is going to prop up this extremist group because, you can't really choose your enemies, or you can't choose your allies. We're just going to play the hand we're dealt. It's like the only reason you're in there is to try to resist against Russia that's in there. Like, it's just these superpowers using these countries as tokens, and it really just reminds me of like the colonization of Africa and how England wanted to compete with Denmark, who wanted to compete with Germany, who wanted to compete with France, and it's all of this like who has the biggest dick, and it's just repeating itself, man. Oh my God, these fucking superpowers are insane. They just can't keep their hands off of Syria.
Turkey shares a 911-kilometer long border with Syria and is perhaps the most affected by the conflict. However, unlike what most media outlets say, Turkey does not directly control the main group that took Aleppo, the Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS for short. This coalition of jihadist fighters split away from Al-Qaeda and now focuses on toppling Assad. HTS is a designated terrorist organization by the international community, including the United States, the European Union, Turkey, Russia, Iran, etc. Turkey has some influence over HTS since their territories border one another, but HTS has its own agenda and operates with a great deal of autonomy. For years, Turkey has been trying to negotiate the integration of HTS into the SNA, which is the other rebel group in the north, but it hasn't worked. So Turkey instead has been left to tolerate HTS because any operation against them by any party would create a refugee wave headed into Turkey. However, with the HTS capture of Aleppo, the group now has the resources to go its separate path. completely independent of Turkey. So, while most of the media portray HTS as a Turkish proxy, they're actually doing their own thing. In fact, HTS's interests now clash with those of Turkey. Meanwhile, the other rebel group active on the ground is the Syrian National Army, or SNA. This is the military arm of the Syrian interim government, the original opposition, the one that started it all. The SNA's green, white, black flag is the hallmark of the Syrian opposition. In the years since, however, the SNA has become a Turkish proxy. So much so that it's now the Turkish version of Russia's Wagner Group or France's Foreign Legion. The SNA has fought Al-Qaeda and ISIS in the past and now wants to topple Assad, but they also want to prevent the PKK and SDF from dominating Syria. In the recent capture of Aleppo, the SNA teamed up with HTS but was then kicked out of some areas. Since then, tensions between HTS and the SNA have flared up. What's more, in parallel with distancing from Turkey, HTS has reached out to Russia, albeit Russia has not taken the bait. Russia's goals in Syria are totally different from those of the other players. The Russian Navy has a facility by the Syrian coast, but it's small in scale, and Moscow's historic relations with Assad have always been erratic. What draws Russia to Syria is its propped-up credibility in the global south. By supporting Assad, as Putin has done, Russia reinvented its status in the Middle East and on the world stage as a kingmaker. It promoted Russia as a steadfast ally. Sometimes, the perception of reality is more important than reality itself. It doesn't matter if Russia has the resources of a global power or not. In Syria, it proved to be a game changer, and that was enough to create that image of a worldwide power. On that score, Putin's military intervention in 2015 was a groundbreaking success. Russia's credibility in the global south surged. Even Arab nations that initially disagreed with Russia started re-engaging with it. So, for Russia, Syria is not about a naval base and localized influence. It's about Russia's image as a global power. Likewise, if Assad falls, Russia's credibility will suffer greatly, and non-Western partners could reconsider security ties with Russia as too risky. This is why Russia is scrambling fighter jets to Syria even though it needs those resources in Ukraine. With its reputation on the line, the Russians can still throw a wrench in the Syrian battlefield. HTS rebels have little international backing, and Russia can drive them into a diplomatic corner. On the ground, however, Russia is constrained by its own war in Ukraine, and it will be Iran that can either make or break the stalemate. The cities of Homs and Hama, located in the center of Syria, will be the final stand. If Assad and his allies cannot hold these two cities, it will harm.
Yeah, and we saw what happened with the rest of that. I mean, they made it all the way to Damascus. And I was listening to like some experts being interviewed on the radio, and they're like, I think that after they took Aleppo, there's going to be a stagnation, and it's just going to be a standstill for another few years. And then it's like, oh, or Damascus just falls. But that's interesting what he had to say about Russia kind of like propping up their image in like using Syria as a way to prop up their image. And that's something that I always wonder too. It's like, why is the United States getting so involved in Israel? Why is the United States insisting on like supporting groups fighting against the Assad government? Is it simply that they want to have a finger on the scale, they want to be involved so that Russia isn't involved? And I think it is kind of something like that. The idea that if the United States isn't involved, then either Russia or China or some other power is going to be involved. And so it's a bit of like a psychosis where it's like, I need to be involved. The U.S. just has FOMO, essentially. That's what the U.S. is. So let's take a look at a bit more of the conclusion of what has been going on in Syria.
Good evening, I'm John Yang. For more than a half century, Syria had been ruled with an iron fist by the Assad regime. First Hafez al-Assad, then his son Bashar. It all came to an end this weekend with stunning lightning speed as rebels moved into the Syrian capital of Damascus, took the city, and with it, the country. Across Syria today, gunfire, chanting, and cheers in celebration of the end of an era. The rebels faced no opposition as they advanced overnight. Russian state media said President Bashar al-Assad fled to Moscow, where he was granted asylum. At a mosque in the capital city, the leader of the largest insurgent group addressed his fighters.
This victory, my brothers, is for the Islamic nation. This victory is a new history for the region.
Ordinary citizens roamed the presidential palace in Damascus, rifling rooms and taking selfies. Across the country, symbols of the Assad family's repressive 53 years in power came toppling down.
Syrian descent.
In 1974, President Nixon became the first U.S. president to visit Syria, meeting with Hafez al-Assad, who had seized power in a coup. Hafez and son Bashar ruled Syria by relying heavily on security forces to crush dissent, and they forged alliances with Russia and Iran. A civil war ignited in 2011 killed hundreds of thousands and forced millions of Syrians to flee their homeland. Today, the Syrian diaspora celebrated in Erbil, Iraq, in Istanbul, in Paris.
A renewal. A renewal. We are starting on new foundations without all the tyranny.
And in Berlin.
This day today, last night, has the same meaning as the fall of the Berlin Wall. This is freedom for us.
The speed of Assad's collapse surprised many around the world. At the White House today, President Biden spoke of the days ahead.
The fall of the regime is a fundamental act of justice. It's a moment of historic opportunity for the long-suffering people of Syria to build a better future for their proud country. It's also a moment of risk and uncertainty.
The rebels' supporters wasted no time in unfurling the opposition flag at Syrian embassies around the world. Even as these events unfolded, U.S. Central Command said it carried out airstrikes against known ISIS camps in Syria, hitting more than 75 targets. What lies ahead for Syria and the Middle East is an open question. Hassan Hassan is the founder and editor-in-chief of New Lines magazine. So a regime that controlled Syria for more than half a century has been erased in what feels like a week and a half. How big a deal is this? What's the significance of this?
It's a big deal, not just for Syria, for the entire region. The regime has been slow kind of disintegration over the past decade or so. It needed to be saved twice. First by Iran in 2013, when the regime looked like it was losing very fast major parts of the country. And then later in 2015 by Russia, when also the regime started to feel under so much pressure by the rebels, Iran failing to save it the second time.
What do we know about the main insurgent group, Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which the State Department classifies as a terrorist group, and the leader of that group, Abu Muhammad al-Jolani?
We know quite a bit of it. It's been a prominent part of the Syrian rebel groups over the past, like I said, over the course of the conflict. They evolved over time. I think like at least 3-4 times over the course of the conflict. First started as part of ISIS in Iraq, to just keep it simple, and then left ISIS and then joined Al-Qaeda, and then still left Al-Qaeda and clashed with both, and then evolved from a kind of a jihadist-dominated force into still a jihadist organization, but away from global jihad into kind of a Syria-focused organization. It's been evolving since.
Is there any hint or a sense of what government or what's going to be next for Syria, or is there a power vacuum that could cause problems?
So a lot of people kind of think, is this another Iraq chaos, and then civil wars and so on and so forth? kind of a long saga of kind of just violence. Or Libya and other places also face the same thing. I think, to me, Syria start not from stage one of the Iraq War, but advanced stages when, after civil wars, after exhaustion, people start to kind of try to work together and try to find something. Remember, the Syrian rebels who just taken over Syria have anywhere from 5 to 10 years of governing in Syria, and they've gone through all the civil wars, fighting each other and fighting until they succeeded in the past few years to unify their ranks, become more organized, become better at governing, and working together through coalitions, getting training as well. They've been preparing for this moment for many years as the Assad regime has been weakening, especially over the past week, past year, when the Assad regime, other Iranian allies in the region have been under this relentless campaign by Israel, Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah has been key ally of the Assad regime. Without Hezbollah, without Iran, the Assad regime cannot continue and sustain and sustain fighting in Syria. That's why when Hezbollah has been weakened, when the Iranians have it's become harder for them to freely operate in Syria. That's when the Assad regime has become so exposed to such an attack. Then, obviously, don't forget that Russia has been also entangled.
Yeah, so he's kind of talking about what we already went over. So I think that this is interesting. We can take a look at the leader, Al-Jolani. What was this video? Oh, yeah, Channel 4 News. Channel 4 News is so good. Man, we might have to watch this one.
Where to start in trying...
But what I think is a little bit interesting and gives me hope is that if we read about Al-Jolani, who is kind of the de facto leader of these resistance groups, we can see that he, like Ben Shapiro is saying that, oh, Al-Jolani is a terrorist and he's an extremist, but he's pretending to be diplomatic. But if you are becoming more diplomatic to get supplies from the United States to increase trade with Turkey, and you're being less extremist, and you are not oppressing minority groups as much, how is that, like, why are you criticizing him? And you're like, well, he's actually just doing that to get access from the West, but he actually hates minorities. It's like, okay, but he's increasing the rights of minorities to get that. So, like, it's effective, isn't it? Like, what, there is no difference between him doing this and pretending to do it, but he's actually extremist, and he's just pretending to do it, but he's actually doing it, and him actually changing his mind. So, I mean, this is interesting. Just like reading about the changing and like his radical views, and like we can take a look at. So in March 2024, widespread protests erupted in Idlib governorate against Al-Jolani's rule. So he was ruling Idlib. It says, under Al-Jolani's administration, Idlib has experienced significant development, becoming Syria's fastest growing region despite being historically its poorest province. The area featured new luxury shopping malls, housing estates, and including a university with 18,000 segregated students. However, his administration faced criticism for its taxation policies, including customs taxes on goods from Turkey and checkpoint fees on smuggled goods, as well as the economic impact of the Turkish lira's depreciation, which was the main currency in the region. In March 2024, widespread protests erupted. So they adopted the slogan, "Down with Jolani," reminiscent of earlier protests against the Assad regime. For over a month, hundreds and sometimes thousands of protesters marched through Idlib cities and towns. The protests were triggered by multiple factors, including allegations of brutality, with reports of thousands of critics held in prisons, and economic grievances related to high taxes. So you read that and you're like, oh, well, it was protests like that which caused the Assad government, or against the Assad government, which caused the civil war to happen in the first place. Brutality and critics being held in prison, like brutality against your political dissidents, that's not good at all. But then You read that instead of doing a brutal crackdown like Assad did, in response to the unrest, Al-Jolani made several concessions. He released hundreds of detainees from a previous summer's security operation, including his former deputy, Abu Maria al-Qahtani, who had been arrested along with 300 others in a purge of this movement. He also promised local elections and increased employment opportunities for displaced persons, while warning protesters against what he termed treachery. And then Turkey is like, we're going to reduce the amount of trade that you can get. And then we can read, or let's watch his interview with CNN. Here it is.
Taking.
So once again, people that are criticizing Hassan for interviewing that Yemeni teenager, Rashid al-Hadid, CNN is interviewing this guy who is considered a terrorist by the United States right now.
Hama, after taking Aleppo, I mean, how significant is this for you right now?
From a military perspective, what comes after Hama will not be the same as what came before. However, I prefer not to be overly optimistic during the battle. I like to remain cautious and vigilant to avoid complacency and ensure we don't suffer losses while believing we are safe.
What comes after this? What's after Hama?
The course of the battle, as for the secrets of the battle, let's leave them to the unfolding events. You will witness them in reality, which is better than discussing them now.
In a matter of days, you have taken major cities. What's changed? How are you able to do this now?
In recent years, there has been a unification of internal opinions and the establishment of institutional structures within the liberated areas of Syria. This institutionalization included the restructuring within military factions. They entered unified training camps and developed a sense of discipline. This discipline allowed them, with God's guidance, to engage in a battle in an organized manner. The progress and execution of plans have been swift, with clear communication and adherence to commands. They stop where they should stop and withdraw where they should withdraw. The revolution has transitioned from chaos and randomness to a state of order, both in civil and institutional matters and in military operations alike.
Some believe this is happening.
That's interesting. He doesn't really cite the weakening of Iran or Russia at all. What he talks about is the resistance groups aligning with each other and how that allowed them to be more effective in their push against Assad. And like, I tend to believe him because it did seem pretty organized how they were able to take over Aleppo and then Damascus a few days later. And then obviously, like, there are real external factors. Like, there's a reason they decided to push now when Iran is at its weakest, when Russia is at its weakest, when Hezbollah is at its weakest. But that does kind of, it gives me a little bit of hope that if these resistance groups are aligned with each other and they are organized, and this guy is he is making a conscious effort to be appealing to Western countries because he wants to have the diplomatic trade with them. He doesn't want to basically be sanctioned and get bombed into oblivion. Like, that is how we get people to be less radicalized. And this is what I was talking about earlier, or this is what I was talking about last week, where you cannot change Hezbollah because we have no diplomatic relations with Hezbollah. And bombing Hezbollah, bombing Hamas, that's not going to make them more liberal. That's not going to make them be more accepting of minority groups, of women, of gays. That's not how you get that liberal change, by bombing them. How you get that liberal change is by opening up diplomatic and economic relationships with them, and then saying, like, if you want to maintain these relationships, you're going to have to start being less extreme. You're going to have to start treating women better. You're going to have to start treating gay people better. And then they're going to do that because now you have a point of leverage over them. There is no diplomatic channel, and bombing does not work if you've just been bombing. And so that, like, going forward, I do like what Joe Biden has to say in the sense that it is maintaining this diplomatic channel. And when Trump says that he just wants to pull out, that is essentially like opening the door to Israel doing whatever they want to Syria. And I do not think that Israel is going to be interested in like a diplomatic relationship with these guys that they deem extremists, simply because we've seen the way that Israel deals with other extremist groups. They bomb the hell out of Hamas, they bomb the hell out of Hezbollah, they will bomb people in the West Bank, even though they're not really associated with any like terrorist groups. They are already bombing these Syrian rebels that took over Damascus.
Happening because the allies of the Assad regime, the Russians, Hezbollah, Iran, that they're weakened, they're preoccupied with other wars. And this is why we are seeing this happen right now. And the Syrian regime itself weakened. Is this what is happening right now? Is this why you chose to launch this offensive right now?
As you know, we are still in the midst of the battle, and discussing such details at this time is not wise.
But you faced more of a resistance in Hama than you did in Aleppo. What do you think happened? Why did the regime withdraw like it did?
The seeds of the regime's defeat have always been within it. It has been effectively dead since that time. However, the Iranians attempted to revive the regime, buying it time, and later the Russians also tried to prop it up. But the truth remains, this regime is dead.
In the last year, it seemed like Bashar al-Assad survived the war. He was welcomed back into the Arab fold and on the world stage.
The Arab countries' evaluation of the situation was mistaken. Some Arab countries try to separate the regime from Iran's project. This is impossible. Even if the regime wanted this, it can't implement it. It's a subservient relationship. Iran can disengage from the regime, but the regime can't. To describe the regime as victorious is deeply unjust to the many children, people, women subjected to rape in prisons, displaced individuals scattered across the world, those drowning in the seas, and those living in tents on the borders of other countries. What kind of victory are we talking about?
In the past, you have talked about strict Islamic rule. Is that still the plan?
People who fear Islamic governance either have seen incorrect implementations of it or do not understand it properly. We are talking...
He's a socialist. There's never been communism done right. The idea of communism is perfect. It's just the implementation that's been off every time. It's a human error, but the system works. But jokes aside, this is going to be important because, we'll see what he has to say. But she's asking basically about Sharia law, and that's what Ben Shapiro is fear-mongering about, how these extremist groups took over, and now Christians are going to die, Jewish people are going to die, they're going to, kill Israel. So let's see what he has to say. And, I mean, all we can really go off of is his words and also his past actions. And his past actions have proven that he is, at least compared to Assad's regime, more liberal, and has proven also that he is open to working with Western forces, trying to become more diplomatic with Turkey, trying to become more diplomatic with people that are protesting him, under his rule. So, yeah, let's just see.
About something that aligns with the traditions and nature of the region. The most important thing is to build institutions. We are not talking about rule by individuals or personal whims. It's about institutional governance. Syria deserves a governing system that is institutional, not one where a single ruler makes arbitrary decisions.
Many Syrians are happy and will be happy to see the end of the Assad regime, but they're also worried about what HTS rule would mean, including minorities.
No one has the right to erase another group. These sects have coexisted in this region for hundreds of years, and no one has the right to eliminate them. There must be a legal framework that protects and ensures the rights of all, not a system that serves only one sect, as Assad's regime has done.
listening to you speaking, you've gone through quite the transformation. Once an Al-Qaeda leader, your group has had affiliations with Al-Qaeda, with ISIS, and now you are projecting this image of a moderate leader and a moderate group. What is HTS right now?
Hayat
Tahrir al-Sham is one of the factions in the region, just like all the others. Now we're talking about a larger project. We're talking about building Syria. Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is merely one detail of this dialogue, and it may dissolve at any time. It's not an end in itself, but a means to perform a task confronting this regime. Once that task is complete, it will transition to a state of governance, institutions, and so on. I believe that everyone in life goes through phases and experiences, and these experiences naturally increase a person's awareness. A person in their 20s will have a different personality than someone in their 30s or 40s, and certainly someone in their 50s.
So are those days behind you?
Sometimes it's essential to adjust to reality, and because someone who rigidly clings to certain ideas and principles without flexibility cannot effectively lead societies or navigate complex conflicts like the one happening in Syria.
People listening to this are going to wonder why they should believe you. You are still a specially designated global terrorist by the United States with a $10 million bounty on your head. Your group is a prescribed terrorist organization by the United States, by the UN, by the EU, and others.
I say to people, don't judge by words, but by actions. I believe the reality speaks for itself. These classifications are primarily political and at the same time wrong. I define a terrorist as someone who intentionally kills civilians, harms innocents, or displaces people. If we're being honest, many of the wars waged by major powers in Arab, Muslim, and even non-Muslim countries have involved the deliberate killing of thousands, the destruction of homes, and the displacement of millions. Even the regime itself is guilty of such actions.
But the US and others would say is that you were parts of groups that did exactly that.
Personally, I have not done these things. The situation must be understood in its historical context. There was a massive war in Iraq that deeply stirred people's emotions, prompting many to go there. The circumstances of that war led people to various places, and my path led me to one of those locations. Given my level of awareness and my young age at the time, my actions evolved to where I am today. I didn't go to Iraq with those intentions. I went to defend the Iraqi people. When I returned to Syria, I didn't want to bring what happened in Iraq into Syria. That's why there were disagreements between us and ISIS.
People would be wondering why you've agreed to speak with us.
What is happening in Syria is significant for the entire world. This event has positive repercussions globally because under the regime's rule, Syria became a source of concern and trouble for everyone. Stabilizing Syria will bring many people back. Today, in the liberated areas, about 1/3 of the population lives in camps, approximately 1.5 million people. I believe we can soon reach a point where there are no camps. With the rehabilitation of the liberated areas, people will return to their homes. Many refugees in Turkey will likely return, as will a significant number of refugees in Lebanon and Jordan. Even refugees in Europe may return to rebuild their country.
And we heard from the leader of...
Yeah, so that's really interesting, and I think we can wrap it up. That's enough for today. A little bit of a research video. But just what are the key points to take away? Well, the key points to take away is that the Assad regime was horrible. And if people are concerned that HTS or the Syrian Freedom Army is going to be extreme in their rule, they're going to take over Syria and they're going to persecute religious minorities. They're going to persecute Christians. They're going to persecute gay people. The Assad regime was doing that already. The Assad regime was, essentially responsible for kickstarting this civil war. Like, when you react violently to mass protests, that's kind of what you expect. And Assad led a brutal totalitarian regime. So, him getting ousted from the country is great. And while I do think, like, I am not under no illusions that this new de facto leader, Abu Mohammed Al-Jolani, is going to be the epitome of liberal values and give Kurds equal rights and Christians equal rights as Muslims. I do think that he is going in the correct direction. And what he said about how when he was younger he was radicalized, but now that he has more responsibility, he realizes that like institutional rule is the direction to go. That is like a shining light, and it does make me hopeful for Syria. And even what Biden is saying, where we need to like work with the UN to kind of rebuild Syria. And I mean, when he talks about keeping US troops in Syria, I don't think that's necessary at all, but of course he's going to try to defend Israel from these radical groups. And when he talks about how we need institutions, we need to respect like all the different groups of people that live in Syria, that is good. And I know that those are just words, but you can also look at his actions and how he has become more liberal as a leader of the city of Idlib over years. And he actually has like repealed back some of his more draconian laws, like imprisoning political dissidents and giving people more freedom in terms of their political sovereignty. So those are all good steps. And I think that the United States can really serve, the United States and the UN can really serve to nurture these like budding diplomatic relationships and bring some semblance of stability to Syria. And obviously, like, I didn't cover this from every angle. This was just kind of a crash course in the history and the different factions and where we think it's going to go from here. But what I can say is that Donald Trump's strategy when he talks about Syria is horrible. He wants to pull out of Syria like permanently and altogether. And while I do agree we should pull out militarily, I do think that we should have like diplomatic relationships, economic relationships offered to rebuild, like no loans, just payments to rebuild. Like there's so many Syrian refugees that are going to be wanting to go back there. That's a program the United States could take part in and the UN could take part in. And Donald Trump wants to do none of that and essentially just give Israel the green light to start bombing these people. And there is no more surefire way to radicalize a group of resistance fighters than by bombing them. That's it. So, yeah, it's a sticky situation all around, but I do think that there is cause for hope. But like this is an extremely complicated situation. I was doing a crash course. I know that this is going to be a crash course for a lot of you, but let me know what your thoughts are down below. What did I miss? Do you feel hopeful in the Syrian situation like I kind of do after this? What do you think Israel is going to do? And we'll keep like reacting to all of these different statements from like conservatives and Democrats as they keep rolling in throughout the week. But exciting things happening in Syria, and we'll see what happens. We'll see what happens going forward. Well, anyway, thanks for watching, everyone. Let me know what you thought about this video down below. Once again, do you agree with me? Do you disagree with me? What did I miss? What different angles should I cover going forward in this situation? And thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.